All right. Gospel of Mark, chapter 1, please. Verse 21 is where we're going to start.
What is that?
Mark 1:21. Okay, I'm going to read. Pay attention to the storyline. Let's see if there's anything you notice. We'll just start there. Okay, I can ask some more pointed questions here in a little bit. So, Mark 1, verse 21. And they went to Capernaum, and immediately on the Sabbath he entered a synagogue, and he was teaching. They were astonished at his teaching, because he taught them as one who had authority, not as the scribes. And immediately there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit. And he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent, come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying out with a loud voice, came out of him. And they were all amazed, so that they questioned among themselves, saying, "What is this? A new teaching and with authority? He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." And at once his fame spread everywhere throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. What do you notice? What sticks out to you in that storyline?
They make an emphasis that being able to do that isn't normal.
Okay. Yes. What else? Mm-hmm.
What was it that he spoke with authority, unlike the scribes?
Right, yeah. It's mentioned a couple of times in this text, right, that Jesus has an authority that they're not familiar with. What else? Okay, go to Mark 5. Beginning in verse 1. Okay, Mark 5, beginning in verse 1. Ready? Okay. Good. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes, or the Gadarenes. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him from the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart and broke the shackles into pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains he was crying out and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him. And crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you, by God, do not torment me." For Jesus said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." He begged him earnestly not to send him out of the country. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, "Send us into the pigs, let us enter them." And so he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs. And the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank and drowned in the sea. Whoops. 14. Now the herdsmen fled, and they told it in the city and in the country, and the people came to see what had happened. And they came to Jesus, and they saw the demon-possessed man. The one who had the legion sitting there, clothed in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs. And they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region, as he was Getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might go with him. But he did not permit him, and he said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you, and how much he has had mercy on you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And everyone marveled. What do you notice? Yeah.
So, was there like something like physically different about Jesus? Because like people just randomly like recognize him to go ahead and just like realize he's different.
Well, the question in this case is who's doing the recognizing? Is it the man or is it the demons? And it appears to be the spirits who recognize it. No, there doesn't seem to be anything sort of striking about Jesus. The Isaiah passage makes reference to that, right? There is nothing in his appearance that we should acknowledge him. And so there doesn't seem to be anything necessarily about Jesus that would be sort of out of the norm. He's just sort of an average Joe, so to speak. I mean, he's God, so it's really hard to say that. But no, not necessarily. What else? Go ahead.
The symbolism of putting the demons onto the pigs.
Why?
Because pigs were already considered unclean for the Jews.
So unclean spirits, unclean animal. What else?
Did the herders just like lose their job?
Yeah, pretty much that was her livelihood.
Yeah.
It may not be the entirety of it, but it's probably a sizable portion of it. Which is why they go into the countryside and they're freaking out. Then they go into the town. They got to tell everybody what just happened because, you know, for them, the economy just took a hit. And listen, bacon.
Yeah.
Oof. We're talking about a Gentile area. Everybody eats pork. Uh-oh. Okay, what else? Okay. Let's do it this way. So in both of these passages, what does Jesus do for an individual that he encounters?
Heals.
From what?
Is that like possessed?
He takes care of an issue of possession. Okay. Jesus performs an exorcism. The casting out of demons from a particular person, right? Person has been possessed by a demon. Driving that demon out of that person is what we call an exorcism. Okay, now, do you notice what Mark calls these things? Does he call them this?
No, evil spirit.
No, he calls them unclean spirit or unclean spirits. Why? Some of your translations that make it evil are overlaying too much in their translation. It's not wrong, but it misses the very fine point that Mark is trying to make. It's not necessarily evil in the moral sense that Mark is highlighting. Trust me, it's evil in the moral sense. But the fine point that he's putting on it is the distinction between clean and unclean. To your point with the pigs. Why does he call them unclean spirits? You notice the only time in chapter 5 when he does not call them unclean spirits? When they're out of the person. Is Mark paying attention to the demon or to the individual?
Individual.
He's paying attention to the person. What problem is created by the person being possessed by one of these spirits? They are unclean. The person. Because the spirit that has taken possession of them is also unclean, impure, evil. We can add all of those synonyms to it, right? The emphasis here is not so much on the fact that Jesus has command over the demons. Trust me, that's in there. The emphasis is on what Jesus is doing for the person who is unclean because of something else. In this particular case, it's not a physical remedy, like a physical healing, it's a demon possession. And so casting out the demons moves the individual from unclean to clean. Mark's emphasis is less on Jesus' power to command demons. That's part of it. Yeah, absolutely, that's part of it. Especially in chapter 5, that's part of it. It's the legion and it's Jesus just cool, calm, and collected giving the commands. That's absolutely part of the story. However, Mark is highlighting for us by calling them unclean spirits while they are in or entangled with the person. He's highlighting the person's problem and Jesus is the remedy to that issue. Once the demons have left the person, Mark feels free to call them demons. But he's going out of his way to call them this, when there's a perfectly good Greek word for demon. Mark chooses not to use it, and instead he uses the word unclean spirit. He will do that every single time there's an individual demon possessed. If he's talking about it like the individual is still possessed, he will call them unclean spirits. The moment they're not in the person anymore, demons, and he uses the word for it, the actual Greek word for demon. But if not, he will describe it as unclean spirits every time. He's going out of his way to highlight something for us in this unclean to clean transition as Jesus encounters everybody he encounters and heals in one way, shape, form, or fashion in the Gospel of Mark. You with me so far? Here's the grandeur of this. What Mark is highlighting by picking up on this, Jesus is the transition from unclean to clean. Is part of the expectations from the suffering servant of Isaiah 52 and 53. Okay? Here's one of the most important things about the Gospel of Mark. Mark's Gospel is going to talk us through these ideas of clean and unclean. We're going to look at another instance of it tomorrow. Okay? But the way Mark presents it and constructs it is an example of how Jesus is the servant of Isaiah 52 and 53. The suffering servant, the one who suffers on our behalf, the Lord who has come to serve and do something on our behalf that we cannot do for ourselves. And this will build throughout the narrative up until the point where you get to the crucifixion. And in Mark's crucifixion, Jesus is the epitome. He's the whole package of everything in Isaiah 52 and 53, just held up in the limelight. Does this make sense? Mark is highlighting this idea of the suffering servant because in the Isaiah understanding, it is the suffering servant who takes those of us that are unclean, all of us, and makes us clean. And so Mark will go out of his way to describe things as unclean or clean that we wouldn't even pay attention to. And we typically, maybe aside from that pigs connection, gloss over the clean and unclean distinction because we don't think that way today. We think cleanliness in terms of stuff like this. And today it's cleanliness, COVID. Wash your hands. Use hand sanitizer. Fill in the blank, right? This is how we think of cleanliness. This is not how the Jewish world thought of cleanliness. Cleanliness in the time frame and in the audience, to the audiences that Mark's writing the gospel, is not about hygiene. Trust me, it was still important, but not about that. It's about the religious sense of purity. A whole life focus of piety and purity, moral sort of upstandingness that comes with a life that's dedicated in the right ways to God and what he requires. Still with me here? Jesus is the person who makes us make the transition from those who are not clean because of whatever affects us or because of our own sin to those who are clean. Whether it's demon possession or it's the issue of sin, Jesus is the mechanism that moves us from unclean to clean. Okay? Good. We will pick up with this tomorrow. You have the rest of the time to work on your papers. Go.